Welcome back. We are on
episode
Point three.
pre-ride episode 3.
Point three.
We'll call it
Point
point three.
three.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what we're doing today. We're going to talk about the names. I did some more research.
The potential name for the podcast.
Yes,
Okay.
I did more research.
So you have a plan.
Here's what I can say. Don't look. Don't cheat.
Oh,
Here's what I can say.
okay.
It was a lot easier naming a podcast 19 years ago because nobody had one and none of the names were gone.
Sure.
That's all I have to say now.
Was this more AI-generated names or more...
A little bit of combination.
Combination of both.
My favorite podcast name that I found that we can't have, but I thought it was funny, was Guys on Bikes Talking Shite. That's the name of the podcast. It was a great podcast name. Okay, so to be clear, names that are not available. Ready?
Okay.
Saddle Stories.
Yes.
The Ride Podcast. Bike Life Podcast. Changing Gears Podcast. That's SRAM. Shift Happens. That's like a life coaching podcast.
Sure.
Shifting Gears and Gear Shift.
Too much.
A lot.
Too many words there.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of cars. Because they have gears too.
It's a car podcast.
Enjoy the Ride Podcast. Bumpy Ride Podcast.
Yep.
Life in Motion Podcast. Break Time Banter.
Yep.
Just Go Bike Podcast. Those are all gone. All right. So, things that we started to come up with, All About the Ride podcast, Bikes Are Life podcast, kind of like soccer is life, football is life, Bike Chains and Changes podcast, chains.
Right.
Okay. Riding Bikes and Shifting Gears podcast, which is too much near that shifting. Like there's
Sure.
The problem is like brand confusion.
Right. And you need something, and you need something that will not be confused with something else,
Right.
even not a podcast,
Yes.
but something else out in the world.
Ironically, the pre-ride podcast available.
The pre-ride podcast. Okay.
So, also
So on the list.
Also available. Steve and Kristen Talk About Bikes podcast.
Right, yes.
It's really hard to find a name when everything is like when podcasting has been around for so long. I mean, when I started podcasting the first time, Apple had just added podcasts to iTunes. So like nobody knew it.
No. Everything was available.
Everything was available. Including Manic Mommies. So yeah, that is where we stand with the name right now. But ironically, yes, and
as you said, we have concepts of a plan now.
we have concepts of a plan. Well, I think what we need to do is we need to release these 3 episodes and or pre-ride episodes on the YouTube.
Are these enough to call an episode? I don't know about that, but
well, that's the next question. So some of the questions as we plan this podcast, and that people I think can answer, the 3 people, Jeff, who I'm going to invite to watch this, they can answer. How long do you think this podcast should be?
right. So a lot of those podcasts do get too long, and some of them I like the length.
Right.
Others do get too long. So you're right. How long should this one be? I think in the 25-minute range.
Okay.
Probably.
I'm in agreement then.
Yeah.
25 to 30 minutes.
Yes.
I mean, Manic Mommies used to go for
Right.
a long time. If you got a good subject,
Right.
sure. But I agree. And I think I was talking to somebody else about podcasts, and they said that the full listenership drops off after the first 10 minutes. I don't want to just do a 10-minute podcast. But
No, I don't either. No,
the problem is I like a long podcast.
Yeah.
I will listen to a long podcast. I have some podcasts
and I can do
listen to
I
that
am
are
willing to do that. We could do
hours.
45 minutes. I don't know if an hour. I think an hour is too long.
Yeah.
I know a bunch of hour-long ones
editing.
that I do like.
Yes.
Hour-long ones that I like. But
I think 30 minutes is good. What do you
yeah,
guys think?
30 minutes.
Okay. Second question.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the segments that you're thinking of for this podcast? What are we talking about?
Well, we had one segment, right? Didn't we write the name down? What was the gold
It was
one?
like
You wrote this down in your notes.
It was so we like the idea of talking about gear,
right.
right? And I like talking about, say, what's the most underrated or underappreciated piece of gear that you have, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's just like good, bad, right? Like this gear good, this gear bad. I think it's like this gear is good, this gear is great, and this is like solid gold. Like this is the top of the line. But like you could, any of them would be good.
So if we're talking
gear. So
about a
like
particular gear,
good, great gold gear, like the
good, great gold, right?
Yes.
Was that it?
And
That was the one we had?
G-spot.
Okay. Right.
Right? Because like there's, we talked about winter boots the other day. Like there's some that are really good, some are fine, and some are like, holy mackerel, these are the best boots ever.
True. So, but then we get into a situation of talking about gear. What if some of that gear is awful? We're just not going to talk about that one. We're just going to go for the good, the good, better, best. Approach.
I'm not into like crapping on bad gear.
Right.
Like if somebody wrote us and said, "What do you think of this thing?"
Well, no, this goes back to your
Like
old podcasting days. If you might get a product and one, you weren't going to either advertise or promote a product you didn't like, but that could be the same way in terms of if you get a product you just don't like, then it just
I'm
goes,
just not going to talk about it.
It goes into the box and you don't talk about it.
Right, unless it's, I would say the exception's going to be, say you are getting a lot of people into the shop who are asking about something new, and it's not just not useful, it's dangerous, or it's going to harm the equipment.
Okay.
Or, because there's always like new things, right? Like what's the worst that your tubeless fluid is not as good as other tubeless fluid? Fine. We don't have to like poop on bad tubeless fluid. We just talked about...
You know that episode's coming.
I know it is. But I think it's more about like, what's the good stuff? Now, if somebody, again, if we have just a catastrophic failure of equipment, or I know you wrote a blog post years ago about like kids' brakes, right? And why they were kind of problematic. They were dangerous. They weren't just problematic.
They were dangerous.
They were dangerous.
Right.
Then I think that's okay. Like that's consumer warning versus just your opinion.
Right.
But you're right. Like if we got stuff from Manic Mommies that somebody wanted us to try, there was no guarantee I was going to talk about it. No. If I didn't like it, I was going to talk about it.
Right.
And so, okay. So that's one.
All right. So that's one potential segment right there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. We're going to talk about some of our favorite rides, like different places or things that we've done.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. I think that's a good thing to talk about.
Yep. Especially if stuff are coming up or if there's like registrations for things and, a lot of people might be thinking about it.
Right.
Right? Like when my cousin called and said, "Hey, I accidentally signed up for Vermont Overland. What's Steve's advice?" And yours was,
"Don't."
Yeah.
Which was
only because he did not own a gravel bike, nor did he know what he had signed up for. It wasn't because
I didn't know if he owned a bike.
We didn't know at the time.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, very, very hard ride.
Right.
So.
And he was awesome.
And he's my cousin.
Yeah,
you have to make fun.
And I'm so.
He was.
We don't want to go into that now, but
we will.
The fact he did it was amazing.
We'll have to have him on. Interviews, right? We can.
Yeah, we could always do an interview. Yep. That'll be. Those are hard when you only have a 30-minute podcast too, but.
Well, they have to be like, that's it.
Right. That's the interview. Right. I've thought about times. Well, I listened to other cycling podcasts where I was like, no, wrong. How do you guys not know this? You guys have a cycling podcast and you don't know that? Now,
we're not calling
I always thought about, there could be
the
correction of the others, but nah, that's too much. It's always been in my head, but no.
Maybe not the correction of the others, but maybe in that like in point 1 where I was like, Kristen has a question about something he saw on the internet. She saw on the internet. So you could do the same thing. Like it could be like, I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about how...
I wouldn't say which one it was, but...
Yeah, and they were talking about how your brakes could wear down the rims of your wheels.
And they can.
This never happened to me. I know.
measured in tens of thousands of miles usually.
Yes,
so.
that's my point. So we're not that podcast.
Right.
I'll go, what? We're not that podcast. I want this to be like informational,
Right.
friendly,
Fun.
Definitely ask the bike mechanic. I would love people to write in and ask questions that maybe they would not want to ask their own bike
Yeah,
mechanic.
you absolutely should, because I have
He has opinions.
so much up here that I have to let go. So let's do that.
I know. This has been in the works for a while. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about tech, just as we wrap this up, for those who might be watching the pre-ride and wondering what we're testing this third pre-ride.
Tech, which way? What we're doing?
Yeah, so let's see. We missed because we had technical issues yesterday. So we've moved up to a new location. We're in our dining room now.
Right.
We have a big old light going, which is exciting. We have our Tascam recorder, which seems to be holding up. Good girl. And now we're trying recording off of our, what is that?
DSLR.
It's a DSLR.
Yeah, it's a Nikon. Yeah. So and so we really need this podcast to go well so that we can get the whole multicam automated setup going. And the things that have happened since your days where it was only a podcast and not streaming at the same time via video. I am just,
we did not
I am
do video.
so impressed on just the out of the box setup systems they have now.
They do have a lot. Although I'm impressed that so much of our tech still stands up.
Well,
the Tascam's doing great.
That Tascam was a quality unit.
The video
at the time.
will be interesting. The GoPro would work, but this should be interesting. I mean,
But we had multiple GoPro issues. I mean, everybody's
Yes.
aware of their battery faults and their file size limitations and their stopping unexpectedly.
My only issue is there's no light telling me if this thing is still recording.
I know.
So I have no idea. But the only thing that didn't really the only thing that really didn't stand the test of time was the Kodak camera that we brought to the Consumer Electronics Show.
We did.
We
Yes,
did try that.
we did.
That was pretty high tech at the time, and that is
It wasn't high tech, but it was nice. It was a nice, cool gadget that we used for video interviews at the time because Intel had you doing those interviews,
right?
And it worked quite well at the time. But you're right. Now
it doesn't hold up.
Can
we talk about how we're tech hoarders and we shouldn't still own all this stuff?
Yeah, I don't know why we still own that. Because we have the Tower of Power, our drawer of old tech,
That's
and
true.
it just, they go in there.
Is that where
and
it was?
That's where it was, the Tower of Power.
Hard time getting rid of stuff. All right. So I guess that's it for this third pre-ride. We're going to release these three. And here's what you can do for us. We would love to hear what you think would be a good name.
What would be a good name?
The podcast.
Right.
Topics you might like us to talk about.
Yeah.
More specifically him. No, you'd like us to talk about. It could be everything from getting into riding, ride gear, rides you've done, and and tell us if you're someone who watches video podcasts or listen to audio. I'm just curious. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good to know. Yeah.
Right?
Right? Yep. I mean, because I now watch a lot of
Never.
the podcasts.
Never. I never do.
Which I have time at the shop to do while I'm working. That's
right.
So that's a
'cause
great
you have...
right, and that's why actually I like an hour-long podcast in some cases because I can put in an hour-long YouTube podcast.
Right.
Right. And then it just plays. You don't have to. You can listen. You don't have to pay attention to it. So you can work on bikes while you're listening, even though it's
I will never watch a video podcast. Very rarely. I like instructional videos, but not. Anyway, leave a comment, question, concern.
There we go.
Look at you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.